Good evening on this Sunday. Welcome to the interview room. We are very excited to have you here, and as you can tell, we have Dr. Gary Brucato and Josh Diaz from the lab. So we want to welcome all of the lab rats, our friends, our second family, our TIR family. We're so grateful that you're all here. All of the fans from Dr. Brucato, I mean, goodness gracious, we might as well get ourselves a train and go to Georgia because Gary is signing autographs for everybody. And we love him for that. A big thank you to our mods, the best mods on YouTube, Miss Sophia, Teresa M, Maui Girl, Mimi J2, and of course, Laura. We are so grateful. Without you, ladies, we cannot do this program. And of course, to our subs and our members here on YouTube, and most importantly, to our Patreon members. We love and appreciate each and every one of you. And if you're not a Patreon member, you can go over there. There's a lot of extra content over there. And Karen and I are so grateful to provide that for you. A lot of behind the scenes stuff. Well, if you don't know Dr. Gary Brucato, and this is your first time here, you are in for a big treat because he not only has the largest database of mass killers, it's the largest one in the world with over 116 years of data. And he's also the author of this best-selling book called The New Evil: Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. If you've not read this, put your seatbelts on, because when you do read it, it's going to change your life. You're going to understand these mentalities a lot better. And so tonight, also, my buddy down here from the lab, Mr. Josh Diaz, he's been around for quite some time, not only before YouTube, but in the radio side. He used to have his own podcast where they did a lot of comedy stuff, and can't you tell he looks like that kind of guy.
I look funny,
and he's funny. He is funny, and Josh, Gary, welcome to the program this evening. It's so exciting to have you here.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely, Gary. How are you doing over there? You got your audio going correctly?
Yes, I think it's okay. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly, and you look clear.
Good.
But that just may be the eye drops I just put in a little while ago, so it may have changed a couple things. So tonight, man, this is kind of a personal situation here. And for those of you who are just joining us, we only ask one thing, and that you hit the subscribe button, and that you share this with all your friends and family through your social networks. That's all we ask. And also the other thing, if you get an opportunity through the program here, run over to Josh's channel on the lab and please hit that subscribe button. And one other great mod, Linda, she's also over there. And when you're watching this program, tell her we say hi, but more importantly, tell her you say hi. So, and she's from Australia, right?
Australia, mate.
All right, mate. Yeah.
Down under.
So tonight, a very personal story, yet somewhat disconnected. We're going to talk about the final report at from UNLV. And this was the shooting that occurred December 13th, 2023 at approximately 1:40 in the afternoon at the University of North Las Vegas. And the individual involved in that is a gentleman by the name of Tony Polito. And Tony is no longer with us after taking the lives of multiple people there at the university. But the reason it's personal is my oldest son, our oldest son, is and was, he still is, at the time, the chair of the economics department there at UNLV, and it was his building that the suspect entered and had attacked. And he missed the guy by about 10 or 15 seconds. While Ian was getting on an elevator, the suspect was getting off opposite elevator shafts. The door closes, and the suspect steps out on the floor below them on the fourth floor and starts shooting. So, and what's weird about that, behind the scenes, our son told us, the day, obviously within 15 or 20 minutes after everything had happened, he had called us. And he said he had this feeling he was going to go down to the student center down on the first floor. He'd gone down to the fourth floor. And while he was at the elevator shaft, he steps in, and that's when the suspect gets off the elevator, and Ian's getting on the other side. And the door closes, and the suspect steps out of the opposite elevator. I mean, talk about divine intervention, right? And protection. Because that's when he opens up on the fourth floor, and Ian thought he had pressed the first floor to go down to the student center, but instead he accidentally hit the fifth floor where his office is. And so the elevator went up instead of going down. And as he stepped out on the fifth floor where his office was and is, he could hear the gunshots. And this is his statement that he gave Las Vegas Metro. And I want to share it with everybody. This is his statement that when they did the homicide report, and that's what this is, the final homicide report on the incident. He says, on Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, at approximately 1340, homicide detectives Gilbert and Hoffman conduct an interview with Ian McDonough, and he relays the following. McDonough was an associate professor and chair for the economics department, who worked for UNLV 9.5 years. His office is located on the fifth floor, the building BEH room 508A. At approximately 11:35, McDonough walked down the southwest stairwell to the fourth floor to speak with the vice dean, Stoney Alder, but Alder was not in his office. McDonough then took the elevator to the fifth floor, where he met Sean McCoy, who had just exited the other elevator. As they exited the elevator, McCoy thought he heard gunshots. This concerned McDonough because McCoy was not the type of person to mistake gunshots for balloons popping. So as Ian is getting out of an elevator, his friend Sean is getting out of another elevator, and there are multiple elevators up there. And his buddy's hearing gunshots, and Ian says a couple of minutes later, McDonough and McCoy were south of the elevators near room 517 when McDonough heard a lot of gunfire from the fourth floor. He also felt the reverberations of the gunshots on his feet. Immediately after that, the fire alarm sounded, and Navarro's office, who was one of the people that were murdered, was west one floor below McDonough's office. So Ian steps out, they hear gunshots, they go where they're walking towards Ian's office. He can feel the vibrations of those gunshots reverberating through the hallways. McDonough assessed who was on the floor, and this is where Karen and I are extremely proud of this young man, and rounded up people. And by the way, he and both McCoy did that together. And it gives the name of the people. And Daraboth was not in his office. McDonough, McCoy, and the other 6 individuals barricaded themselves in McDonough's office. So Ian gathered 6 other people and put them all in his office. Although McDonough could not give an exact number of shots, there were more than 5, but less than 15. Seconds after the shots were fired, McDonough heard banging on the door to room 508, the exterior suite door before McDonough's office. Because Ian is the chairman of the department, he has a secretary, and that door to her office is in the hallway. So he hears kicking or banging, what he told me, and I was on the phone with him, believe this or not, is he thought the suspect was trying to kick his door in, because at the time it says, chairman of the department. He stayed in his office until he was evacuated by the SWAT team, which he was on the phone with or texting them, because I told him to do that too. Hang up with me and start texting your buddy. And he actually plays hockey with a guy who was one of the first responders. During the evacuation, McDonough followed a blood trail that ran east through the hallway and down the southeastern stairwell, and come to find out it was one of his friends. The suspect, when he was done with the 3rd and the 4th floor, took the elevator up to the 5th floor, and this is where one of Ian's colleagues was shot right out in front of Ian's office. And he took off down the stairwell. And this is the guy that ran outside and collapsed in front of the police. And they threw him in the back of the car and took off with him. That was the gentleman that was out in the hallway. And so the suspect had come all the way down to Ian's office. And we'll find out here in a minute that he was intent on killing everybody in that building. Chairman, deans, etc. So McDonough had never met or had contact with Polito. When he became department chair in July 23, he inherited a generic chair email address. He monitored that email address but did not receive anything in terms of a correspondence from Polito. Okay. This is a personal incident, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to cover this tonight with Dr. Gary, and obviously Josh have his mind weigh in as well. So I want to play a real quick clip of the situation that day from the news. Okay, now the crazy thing about this, obviously, when these things are going down, it is an absolute madhouse, as you can imagine, as we can all imagine. And we just saw there for a second how many students were, I think it was really cool, once they figured out that they had neutralized the threat, that it was like the sigh of relief for all the students. And you can see them leaving in that New York Post clip. But here's another really interesting piece of information. Divine intervention. Some people always say, why do you always talk about religion on this channel? I don't necessarily always talk about religion. However, I think it's important to recognize that it's important. And here's one of the reasons why. So the officer, there were two UNLV police officers that were involved in engaging Polito that day. And one of them was a gentleman by the name of Garcia. And why that name is so important to my family is his name is Damian Garcia. And I have known Damian since about 1982, 83. And our children used to play hockey across where we lived in Southern California at a school. Well, guess who used to play hockey with them? Damien. And he used to hang out with the kids. He's a really good officer. Well, when he retired from Carlsbad Police Department in Southern California, he went to UNLV. And so what are the odds that the guy who took Polito on also knew my son, and that the two of them would cross paths once again under such tragic circumstances? And they gave Damien the Medal of Valor and his partner, who both engaged Polito that day. And Ian had an opportunity to catch up with Damien recently. And it was an amazing conversation, as you can imagine. So with that said, I want to get into the mind of this guy. And I could think of nobody better than Dr. Gary Brucato, because this is who he studies and why he studies these guys. Gary, what say you? What are we going to be dealing with tonight, you think?
Well, first of all, anyone who knows about my background knows that I was one of the two creators of the Columbia Mass Murder Database. That was the largest study that's ever been done worldwide of mass murder, which includes all mass shootings that have happened over a period of about 119 years. And the first thing that's important to point out is that Polito would be considered a mass murderer according to our definition, because he had 3 fatalities. It was almost a mass murder by the FBI definition, and other definitions where you have to have 4 victims that pass away in the same place at the same time. But as far as I'm concerned, he is a mass murderer by our definition, and someone who was almost a mass murderer by the FBI definition. He did have a 4th person severely injured who didn't succumb to the injuries. Now, he has many of the characteristics of the average mass murderer, but in some ways he's kind of peculiar. And one of the things that jumps out immediately that makes him a little different is his age. It's important to understand that this guy was 67 years old, which is something of an anomaly. The average age at which a person commits mass murder is in the 30s. You wouldn't expect somebody 67 years old to do that. Although there are some cases, it's not totally unprecedented. Sometimes does happen, but when it does happen in older people like that, you always have to wonder about some kind of change in cognition or inhibition or something that could be going on there. In the case of this particular guy, what I think you had going on was that he was a very characterologically disturbed guy who had a very long pattern of alienating people with his pretentious, condescending, bossy, self-centered attitude. For example, you'll see that there were news reports of when he was teaching. He had an MBA and a doctorate in philosophy, and was a professor. And you'll see that what students would say about him is that he was so self-absorbed that he would start talking about the subject material and then would meander into discussing himself, his life, his own stuff, which gives you the idea that he might have found himself to be way more interesting than the material that he was teaching. It's not really possible to understand this case without understanding that well, 2 things. One is that, like virtually all mass murderers who aren't killing out of psychosis, what we learned from the database is that when you hear about a mass murder, especially a mass shooting, you should always be thinking, what did this person lose or what did this person want that they didn't get? It's always the first thing I ask. And hi, Karen. And it's pretty clear that this guy was pissed off because he saw himself as a God's gift to any university, and he was not getting offered a job at this place, and clearly developed a grudge. And you have to understand that there are two different types of people that commit mass murder. There are the more inadequate personalities that are very impulsive, that might pick up a weapon and run out into the crowd in an unfocused way and do something, or maybe even go on a spree where they just can't let go of the anger and they go from place to place. And then there's this other side that is more sadistic and scheming, that is going to inveigle themselves into a place and sort of bring a lot of weaponry with the goal of eliminating as many people as possible, and they could do it in the cool light of reason. And that kind of person is much more motivated by this ego and this idea that they're going to stick it to you because you stuck it to them, and you're going to pay the price. And that kind of person can plot for weeks, months, and have no compunction whatsoever about it. I think he clearly falls into that category. Now, the other thing you definitely have to know about this guy is that he had an obsession, and I mean an obsession, with the Zodiac killer. You have to understand that this guy, if you look at his writings, believed that he had cracked codes that the Zodiac killer had written that were never solved. And this is very important because at the time that the Zodiac wrote those codes, the greatest minds in cryptology couldn't solve them. The only reason some of them are being solved now is because of computer technology and people that have come up with codes to try to crack the code. But at the time, in the late 60s and in the 70s, these couldn't be cracked by the Navy. They couldn't be cracked by, the leading authorities of cryptology in the country. And so the notion that this guy thought that he had figured them out tells you a lot about the kind of person we're dealing with. So you have to imagine an extremely egotistical killer in the Zodiac killer, right? Who is motivated by ego, sheer ego. And then imagine somebody who thinks that he is even smarter than that. And indeed, for about 25 years, Polito had been a member of Mensa. At least he claimed he was, so that he would have had a superior IQ. And believe me, he knew it and played it up. We also know from my own research, we know that sadism is very much related to IQ. Those two things are linked in some strange way. For example, a serial killer with a high IQ is more likely to torture victims. My theory is it has something to do with the intellectual stimulation that is associated in what they think of as playing with the victim, playing out the crime. So you have to imagine this kind of guy being like a cat with a mouse in his mind. That's going to be a little sadistic and thinks he's smarter than everybody. And Chris, if I remember correctly, he was able to inveigle himself right into that school by basically passing. He just kind of looked like he belonged on campus and slipped right in there. He was wearing like a tie and a shirt and the whole thing, and he strolled right in there, and he would have been covered in ammunition and weaponry and got
Yeah,
right in
he had,
there.
he had a Taurus. And so,
Mhm.
what do you think? Was this his first crime? Do you know, Gary?
This would have been his
You
first,
know?
certainly his first mass shooting. I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that he had a history of offenses that would have been related to being kind of egotistical and getting into fights with people or things like that, or in a lot of lawsuits and things. But not to my knowledge, he had never been somebody that was previously charged with a crime, although I'd have to look. Now, regarding the comment that was just made, I think it's very important to emphasize that he did not have a delusion of anything. He was grandiose because he was narcissistic, but he was not delusional. To say that he was delusional is to imply psychosis, and psychosis is actually quite rare in mass shooters. In fact, the database showed that in mass shooters, I think it's about 12% of them, if I remember correctly. Excuse me, 8%, 8% of them, and that's not a lot. You're far more likely to be psychotic if you use something other than a gun. This guy was not delusional, but he certainly was grandiose. And
Okay.
anyone who knew him would have told you so, which I think again points more to personality. The fact that his whole life he's got that attitude, right? As opposed to just changing and becoming nasty or delusional or something later on, and also who becomes psychotic for the first time in their 60s. If he didn't have a history of it, we would have known about it. You don't become psychotic at 67 unless you're dementing or something like that, or using drugs or something. So my sense is personality disordered guy who was furious that he thought he was entitled to any job in the world, couldn't get this one, and wanted to level the playing field. And there's a kind of indiscriminate quality to the victims, I think, because in his mind, they were all part of the institution in the same way, like a person who goes to war just hates everyone who's the enemy. It doesn't matter who they are. I mean, sure, you want to kill a general or whatever, but if anyone you kill that is the enemy, which is a terrible thing. But I also think it tells you something about how he felt in his institution. In other words, that just because you belong to the institution doesn't mean you're anything special. That's the secret underbelly of how he felt about himself, that he was a nobody, even though he was cloaked in the prowess of the institution. And so when he goes in there and he kills the people that aren't the top people in the institution, that's because they're like emblems of himself. That they're the little nobodies that are going right now. That's not to say your son is not a big fish at the institution, but I think that might have just been because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think that guy would have killed anybody, a security guard, a
He would have killed
janitor.
him.
He just wanted anyone. Don't
Yeah.
you think?
Well,
You
but
picked
he
the
had a
wrong
list.
guy with your son,
He
though.
did. He did have a list. So we'll get through. We'll get to
Yes,
that here in a
that's
second. But
true too.
Josh, what are your thoughts?
Well,
Weigh
not
in.
only did he have a list, it was laminated, and he
That's
was a
right.
very it sounds very type A personality, and
Yeah,
also
obsessional.
what's
Yeah.
really fascinating as well is that when they went through his apartment, he had mailed off a bunch of letters to uh, college personnel around the country. They set up to about 20 letters, and then
Nasty.
yeah, another really interesting part was that he was also being evicted from where he was living. He was being booted out. So and he wasn't getting the jobs that he was applying for. Obviously, this man was disgruntled. He felt probably slighted, like his life wasn't going the way that it should, like a lot of people feel. Um,
Hmm.
and it's really hard to imagine that people get so upset. They call it going postal type situation, and what he wanted was uh it seemed like he was into notoriety, like Dr. Gary touched on earlier. Like he's the smartest one, and everybody else is wrong because they don't understand his genius or how smart he is. And he was obviously a pretty angry guy, especially towards the end of his life. 67 years old
Yeah.
is a weird,
Mm.
strange time to kind of turn into that. But he was obsessed with conspiracy theories, like Dr. Gary said, the Zodiac.
Yes.
One thing that always sticks with me with these cases is that there were 3 dead, and none of them were on his laminated list that he killed. And Chris, your son, packed his room full of people, because there would have been a lot more people if he hadn't done that. I mean, that's obvious in this case. But the residual effects, just down the road, was the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. It seems like Las Vegas has been plagued by that kind of situation, and it opens up a lot of wounds and scars again.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
there are people that were not touched by any bullets that will never recover from that day. I mean, they say that like terrorism isn't about the people that they actually take down. It's about just the fear and of just existing, going somewhere. When you have James Holmes, the shooter, the Aurora shooter, you know, people didn't want to go to the movies anymore. The president comes out and says, go to the movies, and it's, it's safe to go to the movies. Well, how do you convince people that it's safe when, you have these kind of random attacks? And what are the chances of it happening to you? Well, I don't know, but Chris, I mean, it happened to your son.
I'll tell you. And
Yeah.
look, let's just cover a couple of the details real fast, and then let's get.
Chris, is it okay if I just very quickly say something in response to
Yes, of
something
course.
important
Go ahead,
Josh
Gary.
said before the thought gets lost? So, Josh, you touched on something just now that I think is extremely important. That's easy to miss, which is that this was very close geographically to the location of the Paddock mass murder, which is the worst that ever happened. Which, by the way, was also an older male. Another one where we have that weird anomaly of the age going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a coincidence either, because this guy, like when the type of mass murder that he is, part of the narcissism is the desire for infamy and
Yeah.
sort of becoming associated with or beating the record of the person who has the number one spot, on the list of victims or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if that figured in a little bit to the logic. I wouldn't be surprised if we found out that he visited the
Right. Remember the old.
example as if he were visiting a
You
shrine,
you froze just when you were
right?
going to
And
say. Do you remember the old Cheech and
no,
Chong
I said I wouldn't be
album
surprised. I wouldn't be
where
surprised
they go,
if he went to the Mandalay to the hotel like a shrine
Right.
and visited it
Yeah.
before the shooting at the college,
interesting.
because he would have had a special place in his heart for that mass shooter.
So
That's the whole thing. So that's
you,
interesting, Chris, that Josh caught that.
yeah, absolutely. And you froze just when you were about ready to say what you were going to say. And it reminded me of the old Cheech and Chong album where, remember, he goes, everybody in this room have motive for killing Mr. Taylor. And the name of that killer is snack
Yeah.
bar main open out of 5 minutes. After that's closed for the evening. Thank you. That was exactly the moment that just took place here, Gary. So,
So funny.
so it
Wow.
was perfect. But yes, I agree 1,000% that Josh caught on to something that was vitally
It's
important.
very smart because don't you think, Chris? It wouldn't be surprising if he stopped by to kind of get his
Well,
gusto up
well,
a
I'll
little
tell you
bit.
that from reading, from reading about this guy, he had an obsession, it sounded like, with Las Vegas. Like for some reason, he was drawn to Las Vegas. And if you don't think that he knew all about the deadly shooting, it was just, it would be crazy to think that he would ignore something like that. Somebody that was going to commit a crime, with the proximity to what had happened, a few years before. I mean, I could not see it any other way.
Yeah, this is a good point
Well,
here too, but
it's a really good
I'm
point.
going to mark it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
hmm
So let's
I
go.
think, yeah, let's jump in.
No, let's just. I just want to read from the police report for a minute and then get your guys' opinion on it. So, this is essentially the breakdown from the investigators, synopsis of the crime scene, crucial interviews, blah blah blah. Okay, now mind you, remember Ian goes from the 5th floor to the 4th floor. He goes to the dean's office, Sander, and he's not there. So he goes back to the elevator and goes up. Listen to this. After Polito entered the building, he likely took the elevator up to the 4th floor. He walked by Dean Sanders' office as seen by Gonzalez. He then walked to the southeast hallway where he approached Navarro's office, who placed the 911 call. The audio from that call captured a gunshot, a female scream, and then 4 additional gunshots. 8 cartridge cases were found in her office, indicating that Polito had already fired 3 rounds before the recording started. Polito then walked back to Dean Sanders' office after most people had scattered and fired 2 shots into his chair. For a total of 10 shots were fired at the 4th floor. Polito then took to the stairs to the 3rd floor, where he encountered Takemaru. Likely when she exited her office, number 352, Polito fired 5 times at Takemaru. He then walked to the south hallway where he encountered Chang and fired 3 more times, bringing the total number of rounds fired on the 3rd floor to 8 at this point. Polito conducted a magazine change and dropped or placed the white laminate card, the one that Josh was talking about, near Chang's feet, accounting for 1 full magazine of 18 rounds. Polito then went to the 5th floor. Now, by this time, this is where Ian is because he's hearing the gunshots below him, and they've gathered up the people and they're rushing into his office. up to the 5th floor via the elevator. After he exited, he walked to the South Hall at the same time Rith, who had come from the southeast stairwell walking east. As the two closed distance at the T intersection, Polito fired 7 times at Rith, who was able to escape down the southwest stairwell. And this is where all of that had taken place out in front of Ian's office. Polito then took the elevator down to the ground floor. So he was intent on moving up and down and all around. What's jumping out at you, Gary, on this?
Well, first of all, the one thing, I'm very interested in the little quirks, the little trifles of what people do when they're planning. And I am absolutely fascinated by the lamination of the list that he had, and which, of course, he didn't wind up playing out. But I mean, I'm sure that somebody this obsessive and with this much of a grudge remembered the names of everybody. It's not like when you're going grocery shopping and you can't remember that you need, Doritos and 3 rolls of toilet paper and a pack of pens and soap, and you write it down. This is a situation where he would be intensely focused on these people. So who was the list for? And why did it have to be laminated? I mean, Josh, you thought of that too, that's odd that it was laminated. The only thing I could think of is that number one, he thought it was extremely important that when the whole thing was over, he didn't want it bloodstained and something that you couldn't retain like a treasure of when it was over. So that whether he was dead or alive, I think he thought that this was something extremely important, like keeping the 10 Commandments and the Ark of the Covenant or something. It needed to be preserved for posterity, in the plastic. And there's something about that is just bizarre,
Yeah, it
obsessional,
was like it was
and grandiose.
his whole purpose. Like that was his final mission or whatever it was, and it needed to be protected at all costs. And
Mhm.
because obviously he wanted people to see it, and
Exactly.
so he wanted to protect it. And when he did, he went as far as to laminate it, and it preserved it. You're exactly right.
And
Well, I mean, it tells you that.
here are the gunshots into the dean's chair.
Mm.
So, I
Right.
mean, what's the messaging into this? Even though the dean's not in that office, right?
How dare he
Right.
not hire him?
Wow,
If you
interesting.
were
Yeah,
here, you'd be dead. I mean,
Yeah,
that's really what it means.
yeah.
good
And
point.
Chris, it's also. I mean, I know you can't show them, but the individual messages that he sent to people that he was targeting were outrageous.
Yeah.
I mean, what he was doing was, I mean, I've seen them. I'm sure you have too. What he would do is he would pick on some trait that the person had, some psychological trait, some insecurity, and attack them on it with vitriol. And we've all known people like that in our life, a person who takes insults to a special level because they're sadistic. Those kind of people, they get you to open up and then you tell them something you're vulnerable about. And then when they want to hurt you, they go into their quiver and they pull out that thing that you could really, really hurt the person with. So it's like a life scarring barb. And I think this is a guy who, before he resorted to using bullets, I think used his mouth as a weapon for years. I think this is the guy who would that guy who would send messages or just tell you off in that way that just leveled the playing field and made you feel like a crumb. And in doing that, compensated for certain feelings about himself where he must have felt really very tiny. Now, Josh, you made a reference to Cheryl, the postal worker that shot the place up when you used the expression going postal.
Mhm, yeah.
And that's actually a very comparable case. I mean, I don't really want to get too off the beaten path, but the reason it's important is he was really the guy that started to give the FBI the idea, people like John Douglas, the idea that you have to look for what the person lost, right? And in that case, just like this, it was a job thing. This is my identity. You're keeping it from me. I'm going to hurt all of you, and you're all going to know. And in all those cases, what happens is they go and they look at the records and they see that for months, sometimes years, these people have been sending complaint letters in. Now, if I remember correctly, John Douglas predicted that about Cheryl. He said, you're going to find out that this guy's been sending complaint letters in about the post office. And sure enough, there were letters. And it's the same thing. If we didn't know that Polito did, I would have said, all of us, I'm sure Chris, you would have said the same thing. This is a complainer. There's probably a stack of letters to the president of the university saying, hire me. I'm the greatest guy in this field. You're an imbecile, blah, blah, blah. And then
Yeah.
when he wasn't heard, he got on a plane with weapons and went in there to make his point. And I think that's the whole symbolism of the lamination is my message is very important and nobody's going to destroy it.
Well, here's the victim, right? Chang
Strength.
is obviously for privacy reasons is blocked out, but there's that laminate card that Josh is talking about,
Yeah.
right? Thrown at her feet. What's the messaging in that? And here's the magazine where it reloads.
Well, I think you'd agree, Chris, that if you were investigating a crime scene and you saw that, in addition to the bullets in the chair, I think you would see it sort of like you see in gang murders, that it's a message. It's like a way of saying, you know, you're dead because of my rage, and you would be dead if you were here.
Yeah.
It's like doesn't it look kind of like a gang
Yeah, and here's
communication?
the card. He's got all of these individuals with their positions on it and the rooms that they're supposed to be in. So, yeah, to Josh's point, to your point, Gary, I mean, this guy came to work. He came to work. He was going to take care of business here.
Your son must have known all of these people.
Well, I don't know. I haven't asked him, but it was all his colleagues that were killed. I mean, he, by the grace of God, again, literally within probably 10, 15 seconds of Ian going onto the elevator or elevator, because remember, Ian was on the 5th floor, and he goes down the stairwell, comes out, goes to the dean's office, the one with the gunshots in it. Okay. And to have a meeting, and he's not there. So he goes, oh, I'm going to go down to the student center. So he goes over to the elevator on the 4th floor. He thought he pressed the 1st floor, but somehow it ended up, he obviously in retrospect pressed the 5th floor. And so had he gone down, the 1st floor to the student center, then, who knows what would have happened, at that point. But the point being, he goes up, and as he steps out, his other buddy, okay, is also stepping out of the opposite. So the elevators are going up like this, and the two of them step out together, okay? And next thing you know it, they're standing on the floor for a minute. Well, he's now who had come up from the stairwell where Ian was just at coming down, okay? So they miss each other on the stairwell. Ian goes onto the 4th floor looking for his friend. He's not the dean. He's not there. Walks over to the elevator. His other buddy has caught the other elevator going up to the 5th floor. Ian catches up to the 5th floor. They step out almost simultaneously, and they hear the gunfire below them on the 4th floor. Okay. So they start immediately gathering people on the 5th floor, and that's when they rushed into Ian's office, barricaded themselves in the office. The suspect, after shooting everybody, he shoots everybody on the 4th floor, goes to the 3rd by the stairwell, shoots more people, gets on the elevator, goes to the 5th, and steps off on the 5th floor. And that's when he, shoots Ian's buddy, his other colleague.
Well, it's very interesting. Just before the show, I was talking to somebody, Laura, who I know is watching. Hello, about BTK. And this is important to mention here because BTK, also a mass murderer, had a similar egotistical, obsessional, condescending personality structure. And what he underestimated, just like Polito, is that when you actually get in there to commit a crime, you're going to lose control because not everything is that predictable. And when you lose control, your focus changes and everything gets haywire, right? And I think that's what happened here. I think this guy went in fantasizing that everything was going to be totally in his grip. And what actually happens is he presses the button wrong, he winds up on the wrong floor, he bumps into people, he doesn't anticipate goodness in people, so he doesn't expect that anybody's going to do anything heroic or help anybody because he thinks the whole world is as horrible as he is. And what you have to imagine is that he loses control and then the focus gets vague. So that because once he's out of control, he can't methodically move from room to room in the way that he wants to. So then you start picture all hell breaking loose, right? You picture all hell breaking loose and this guy just firing at whatever, which is where I think I'm getting the impression that despite the laminated card, he would have taken any victim he could.
Well,
Because I think at that point control is gone. Are you guys seeing it that way too? That
yeah,
he didn't anticipate, like BTK, what was going to happen.
when Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, also witnesses, said that, you know, after the shooting started, that they were wandering sort of aimlessly, kind of like, you know, just kind of nomads. Their plan, it didn't go the way that it was supposed to, and that it was sort of like people were saying that they seemed like they were in sort of a euphoric state, you know, like laughing, giggling, but just sort of walking around, kicking doors open, you know,
Yes.
no rhyme or reason to why they're going. You know, they had a plan, it didn't go well, so let's just, you know, do this. And it sounds like that's kind of what happened here as well.
Infinitely. I mean, remember, as you pointed out on your last episode of the lab, I was on with you, that in Columbine, they had originally planned, you know, to use explosives and had specific targets. But then when things don't go as planned, it just becomes a free for all. And I think that's what happened here. I think he certainly came equipped to kill a lot of people. But I think the idea was there are these kind of big fish that I'm going to take out. And then what happens is when that doesn't work, then you develop a way more generalized hostility and everything becomes chaotic. And I think it's because of the overestimation. Now, where is another case where we see that exact process? I believe in the Brian Kohlberger case. If Brian Kohlberger is guilty, it's another egotistical, narcissistic guy who went in there, to, you know, thinking that he had complete control over a situation, and everything goes to hell. Nothing goes the way expected, and you wind up committing a very large mass murder when you might have had one target. Right. So I think the idea is the lesson, the forensic lesson is that very organized people can unravel into more disorganized offenders in terms of their targets when they overestimate their abilities. And wouldn't you say, Chris, it has that flavor?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, listen to this. This is Sean, who is Ian's colleague. So he goes, McCoy entered Beam Hall. His name is Sean McCoy, a couple of good Irish boys.
Mm-hmm.
Entered Beam Hall through the southeast employee door at approximately 11:42 hours and walked to the elevators that center the building. When McCoy was approximately 20 feet from the elevators, he noticed 2 to 3 students and Megan Nair, the director of media relations at Laird Business School. McCoy then heard 3 gunshots. McCoy looked at the students and Nair and asked if they heard the gunshots, but they indicated they had not heard anything. McCoy then heard more gunshots, which he believed were coming from inside a classroom on the second floor of Beam Hall. After the second round of gunfire, McCoy said there was 1 to 2 second pause followed by loud screams. McCoy rushed into the elevator with Neary falling. Neary's office was on the 4th floor, and the 4th floor elevator button was pushed. So it was already pushed.
What?
Oh my goodness. When the elevator stopped at the 4th floor, the doors opened. They began yelling into the hallway, telling everyone, run, hide, and fight. This guy's another hero. He really is. When I'm reading this, I'm getting chills. Okay. After the elevator door closed, they proceeded to the 5th floor. Now, this is where Ian is by this time. When the elevator stopped on the 5th floor, McCoy and Nira took an immediate right south and went to room 508. That's Ian's office, where McCoy department chairman Ian McDonough had his office. McDonough was not in his office initially, but arrived shortly thereafter. McCoy saw multiple faculty members and students in the hallway and told them, "No time to think, shooter, get behind Ian's door." McCoy described Ian's office, or McDonough's office, as an office within an office. McCoy estimated 9 people barricaded with him there. At approximately 11:45, McCoy texted his wife telling her, "Leave help, go take care of the kids, problem on campus." Shortly after the text was sent, the fire alarm sounded. McCoy heard more distant gunfire, which he did not consider an immediate threat, coming through the drywall. McCoy heard more gunshots that sounded closer and believed it came from the south hall of the 5th floor. So the suspect's on the 5th floor now. Ian thought that too. The two of them are thinking the same thing here. McCoy and the others used multiple bookcases and tables to further barricade the door. McCoy estimated that the time he texted his wife to the time they escorted out of the building was 1 hour and 45 minutes. Can you imagine sitting in that room for 1 hour and 45 minutes? The SWAT team escorted McCoy towards the east stairwell. He noticed blood trail on the floor. McCoy and his group were escorted down the east highway, or a stairway, out of the building, and they passed the deceased suspect. Ian told me that they saw him as well. McCoy did not recall how many volleys of gunfire he heard, describing them as periodic but consistent. Some of the gunfire sounded faded and others sounded closer, possibly from the floor beneath, 4th floor. He described the gunfire did not sound like rapid fire. Rather, there were pauses between the shots. McCoy also heard pounding making its way up the business school, which he later thought was SWAT officers kicking in doors. McCoy did not call 911, but he believes other people had barricaded themselves in UNLV police on the app. He was able to identify several of the people who barricaded with himself, including McDonough, and then the rest of the other people. Man, oh man, that guy is lucky to be alive as well.
Yeah, Polito had a lot of ammunition on him.
A lot.
He certainly did.
I mean, he had many clips, close to 10 or something like that. I don't know, but he had a lot of ammunition. And the cop that eventually, was a university cop that stopped him. I mean, he put an end to it pretty quickly. I mean, he was a very brave person. I mean, he didn't know exactly what he was going into, and which you never would. And running to it, that's it takes an amazing person. Also, I mean, it's not lost on me that, I mean, your son is a hero, absolutely a hero.
Absolutely.
Well, they're all,
I agree. All of them.
mean, Ian's out there gathering people up.
He gathered,
exactly. And McCoy's going, running to his office looking for Ian, and the two of them ran into each other, is what he says. And he's like, "Hey, dude, that is definitely gunfire." And so then that's when they were yelling at everybody at various increments. And this is the gentleman that just got out of the hospital recently, who ran to the cops downstairs and collapsed, and they picked him up. That officer got the Medal of Valor as well for throwing him in the back of his patrol car and rushed him to the hospital. And he was in the hospital for almost 2 months, but he survived. He survived. I'm trying to get down to the, there it is.
Well, Chris, one of the things I keep thinking about ever since I heard about Ian's involvement in this is how much of what he knew to do, he knew because he happened to have a father that was in law enforcement. I mean, did he learn some of those tricks from you of what to do in the case of an active shooter situation, or did he just resourcefully do it?
Well, Chris, you were giving him advice, correct?
Yeah, he was on the phone with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and barricaded in his office. And I told, well, first he texted me. He says, "Dad," he said, "active shooter." And I said, "Where?"
Wow.
In a text message. And he goes, "Here." I said, "Holy crap. Okay, barricade yourself. Run, fight, hide." Okay. you know, and he was like, I've got a buddy who's on the SWAT team. I said, well, get off the phone with me and call 911 and call your friend. And so what he ended up doing was texting his buddy, who they play hockey together on Thursday nights. And his buddy was on the SWAT team, part of the entry team. And his buddy was texting him back, Ian, where are you? And he was like, I'm on the 5th floor of my office. And the suspect is trying to kick in the door. And that's when he believed it was the suspect trying to kick his door in, but he couldn't get it in. He couldn't get into it. And anyway, that's that piece of the puzzle. So yes, where he got it, I mean, it's part of the McDonough gene. My dad, was in the Marine Corps 31 years, fought in 3 wars, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and his memoirs, which are right here. My father's memoirs are here. And this is my father. Let me show. That's my dad. Okay. And that's him in his uniform in his 80s. And he's buried in, with my mother in Arlington National Cemetery. And long story short, this is the kind of stuff, my dad's memoirs here where, he's got pictures of, this is one of his bunkers in Vietnam, and he was in the Chosin Reservoir, one of 15 guys that survived. And he was hitting the Chinese soldiers with shovels in the Chosin Reservoir. And he's in 2 books. But so that gene of you don't have permission to die, okay, I think that's what Ian was coming from. Because I was, I had the boys in hockey. They were very good hockey players. I mean, as you guys know, you guys know them, but the public doesn't know. Ryan was ranked number 3 in the country from USA Hockey. He played Canadian Junior A hockey at 15 years old, and he was up at the MTHL, the Montreal Toronto Hockey League, and he was a force to be reckoned with, and he was about ready to go as a career when he died at 20. So there was a lot of changes, but I guess the point that I'm making is Ian has that same gene. Dylan has it. That's why he's fearless. That's why he flies. I can't fly. Are you kidding me? We were just on the phone with him before the show tonight, and he says, yeah, Dad, I'm flying, over there, over here, over there. And I'm like, don't tell me until you touch it, until you're back on the ground. I do not want to know. Okay.
Right.
But hey, here's one other thing I think is really interesting. You and Gary, I don't know if anybody's caught this yet, right? So
I saw this.
Here is the size of the clothing. Guess what all of this is in Polito's closet?
They're women's dresses.
Okay. I got to know from the doctor's mind what's going on in the shooter's head. Nobody has picked this up. This is the first time you're hearing it on YouTube or you're hearing it into the environment. But do you think he's angry on that piece of the puzzle?
It's impossible to say because, there are cases of people who, for example, were extremely attached to a woman in their life, a mother, a wife, a significant other who passes away or leaves them and they can't get rid of any of the materials. Then you get people like Russell Williams who are keeping things like that because they're putting it on, because they have an arousal that comes from wearing those clothings, or we don't know what the significance of it is, but it's certainly interesting. At the very least, you see there some kind of compulsive, obsessional quality, which we already figured out from other aspects of him. But it's always interesting to think about, like they say in the Cold Case Foundation and the FBI, they talk about how people have a public life, a private life, and a secret life, right? And you wonder, what's in the recesses of a person, what's in literally in their closet. And we don't know without further information, but it is intriguing to think, where this guy's control needs,
Well,
might have
the article
come
that I
from.
read says it was for sex
Right.
workers.
Hmm?
He
The
what?
article that I read said it was for sex workers.
Oh, so he would
To
have
make
them
them
at his
wear a
house.
costume? You mean he had a fantasy about making them put on the outfit?
I
Well,
mean,
that would certainly go with
makes sense.
the control obsession. So the idea is that he brings home, let me see if I understand, in a serial fashion, because this guy's personality, you could easily see him doing something in a serial way, being a serial person who commits SA, having a fantasy that he needs to play out in a serial way, being nasty to people in a serial way, maybe even, under different circumstances, having been a serial killer. But he has a lot of those personality disorder features that you could see, particularly the sadism that you could see in people like that. So if that is true, then the idea would be that a person comes over and he literally dictates their identity and their behavior and what right down to what they're wearing, because the person is kind of interchangeable in a fantasy. And so that's interesting too. I mean, I suppose that's another possibility. He's either wearing them, they're left over from someone, or he's using them in a fantasy. It's one of those three. Otherwise, why on earth would he have them? And that is the very first time that I have ever heard anything about him getting involved with prostitutes and making them wear certain outfits. It's kind of interesting. It's also interesting that he has the preoccupation with the Zodiac killer, where there was no sexual element. It was just a kind of a grudge against the human race. A little bit of extra focus on women, but he's not committing SA or anything. He certainly seemed more interested in the women than the men. The men are rapidly killed, and then he concentrates. So, but that's interesting. Did you hear that, Chris? That thing that Josh is saying, that he would bring sex workers and make them wear the outfits? I've never heard that.
Well, it may be in the police report, but he's got a size. These are all size 12, so you have to have the same size gal.
Right. That's a little strange. So that the idea being, so let me get this straight. Now, I don't know women's dress sizes. Is 12 a small or a large
Well,
or a
you're in
medium? What
luck,
is 12?
Gary, because we just happen to have an amazing chat full of amazing women who can fill
Okay.
these three guys in on what that means. And so my sweetheart can weigh in here too. I know she's watching the chat.
What is that? I
All
mean, I
right.
don't, I don't have
The
mom in the
question
fruit
is for
cellar
these
like Norman
three
Bates. I don't know.
goofball guys, ladies,
I
is
get confused by it, to be honest with you.
what?
I get confused by like lady sizes.
They all look like silk.
That
Yeah,
too.
that's interesting. Well, the fact that they're even there, I mean, this when I saw this in the report, I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. All right, here's Karen. Size 12 is about average, not small, but not super large. Okay. All right. He might have had a girlfriend, Mimi says. He might have
Oh,
had a girlfriend.
So what is it from like 0 to what, a 20?
who who are you asking that question to?
Don't
I
know. I
are
don't
you
know.
kidding me? What, how many men does it take to change a light bulb?
Depends.
30.
Depends what
One
size.
to hold the bulb, 29 to spin the ladder, right? I mean, let's be honest with each other in this. We're out of our league when we're talking about this stuff.
10 to 18,
Well,
somebody said. I don't understand that at all.
well, he was, Polito was not a svelte guy. I don't believe that he would be, if he were putting the dresses on, he would need a size larger than
12.
what sounds like an average, about 120 pounds, somebody said. So I think we can knock that likelihood out. I mean, he wasn't squeezing himself like
So I would need
a
a size
10-pound
3.
salami and a 5-pound, right into the. So I think we could take that one off the table in like a cross-dressing kind of situation. So then what are you left with? That this is a guy who cannot let go of things that he's lost. And there's some woman in his life that he creates a kind of shrine and keeps everything, right? Like you see in certain offenders. or that they are necessary for the playing out of some kind of fantasy with people where he's got to be very particular about what they look like and all that. But this guy's personality traits are much more consistent with the kind of person who struggles to express his issues through sex. This is more the kind of guy that would compensate, like Koberger, the way I envision Koberger, that would compensate more by condescending to you, being mean to women, talking down to them, being smarter in your mind than them because you feel inadequate. That's more the way I would picture this guy. Wouldn't you say that, Chris? He's got that flavor. He's like a control freak who's kind of a loser.
Well, and if we read,
It's-
right, if we read a lot of the comments from the interviews with his students, it would, the conversation would be about, 2 seconds about them, and then the rest would be
Yeah.
completely about him.
Mhm. Definitely. He was a completely self-absorbed guy. And I think, there probably were personality features that were somewhere, a mixture of all the clusters, right? Because in psychiatry, there's cluster A, B, and C in terms of personality organization. And in A, you have all the odd stuff, the paranoid features, the schizotypal, the schizoid, that kind of stuff. And in cluster B are all your classic, the nasty people and the emotionally unsteady people, right? So you have a mixture of the hysterical kind of histrionic character, the narcissistic, the borderline, the antisocial that can fall in there. And then under C are the more avoidant, obsessional kinds of people that are afraid and are trying to prevent losing control or being hurt. And I don't mean to sound pejorative because for the people that where this rises to the level of a personality disorder, they're suffering because of these things, right? But I'm talking just personality organization, right? And so this guy had a mixture of kind of conspiracy theory, paranoid stuff like you'd see in cluster A, the narcissism and the antisocial and sadistic stuff like you'd see in B, and the obsessional stuff like you'd see in C. So he was, in my mind, a kind of soup
Well,
of
and he's
aberrant
he's
personality
sending
structure.
letters
Yeah.
also to other schools,
Yeah, just
to
like
other,
Zodiac.
yeah, and
Yeah.
he's putting powder in
Yeah.
them, which I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, Zodiac also used greeting cards. For example, he sent Paul Avery, the author Paul Avery, a Halloween greeting card with a skeleton on it. He would sometimes send comical cards that had to do with not having written in a long time. I think that all of this, even the use of caps, even the framing of the way the margins are on the paper. A lot of this seems to me to be little homages to the Zodiac
Yeah.
killer. If you know the case intimately, you would feel something about this guy that smacks of Zodiac. And
And
even sending the letters with the handwriting on them to make them look kind of more personal. Think of the arrogance of being a criminal who's going out of your way to avoid detection, and you handwrite your envelope. Right. I mean, just think of how arrogant that is. I mean, it suggests maybe even that you want the personal touch when you zing it to the person. I want to be in the room, when you die, that kind of thing.
I
And I don't want you to think that, it could have come from anybody. It was from me. And the use of poisons is also very typical of arrogant, detached, obsessional people who have the idea that they're going to hurt you from afar. Poisons actually are favored by female offenders way more than males, which is interesting too. But they're favored because they don't require the physical aggression that is necessary to eliminate the person, where it might be helpful to be male, because is that it's favored to sort of put a powder in the room or something in somebody's drink and kill them, and then you never have to touch them. And Chris, I bet in your homicide work you rarely saw poison, right? It's not very
yeah,
common.
I didn't have a poison case.
Yeah. It's not as common as people think. The movies make it seem common, but it's very unusual. And 9 times out of 10, in my experience, when powder gets mailed and stuff, it's not even really anthrax or anything. It's just like something to scare you.
Okay, you're not going to believe this, but so he had a tattoo. I'm reading the autopsy report. I'm not going to show it.
Mhm.
So he had a. Josh, you have the report, you in Ariel? That's all right. Don't worry about it. Don't worry
right.
about it. On page 137. So this one is weird.
Tattoo.
This one's weird.
Any tattoos? I'm curious
Yeah,
about that.
of a phoenix above his groin area.
There was a tattoo?
Yes, of a phoenix.
I feel like Hannibal Lecter going, was it a butterfly?
Okay,
I
but
knew he was gonna have a tattoo.
then his
Okay. All right.
private parts had
Mhm.
piercings.
Oh my God. Great.
That's
Yeah.
one.
So you're
That
starting to
that's
see,
one
Chris.
sick puppy right there. Now, you tie that into some of the other things we're talking about.
His
Oh my
identity
gosh.
is a little vague. Yeah, right.
Yeah, a
I mean,
little.
he's 67 years old.
Yeah, you can't get much more. Okay, what's the phoenix stand for? Right? What's the symbolism in the phoenix?
Oh no.
And I'm not talking
He
Arizona.
rose above something that tried to destroy him,
Wow.
which of course is the you know
This,
the symbolism of course of what he did at the school. So that's how he saw himself, right? The fact that that the proximity to the groin is very interesting. Remember, there's one interpretation that is made sometimes of people who are very heavily pierced or tattooed or whatever. That some of them now look, some people just do that for self-expression, right? And
I love
but
that. That's
that's
just
funny. I wonder
terrible.
how many people know what a zoetrope is. I happen to know what it is. But it's an animation device, a wheel that spins around and makes cartoons. But the idea is that uh,
This must not be his
this
first
guy,
name.
that some people who are pierced and tattooed or whatever are people who have been abused, and it's a
Yeah.
way of telling the world, you didn't cause me pain. I choose pain. Look at how much pain I inflict on myself. You know, I'm covered in piercings and tattoos. I've let people cut me and put and it doesn't do anything, doesn't hurt me at all. So screw you, And I think that with this guy, if I had to speculate, if he were a therapy client or something, I would be wondering if at some point this guy had his sense of loss of control and disrespect or whatever maybe had something to do with some sexual humiliation at some point in his life. He's extremely sensitive to humiliation, extremely sensitive to slighting, seems to have some kind of murky identity with regard to gender, seems to be coming on the table a little bit here, which is interesting. And there's also something very secret about that. So it's the idea of like, you're looking at me and I look, a certain way on the outside, but if you took my clothes off and you looked underneath, you'd find the piercings in the groin area and the tattoo of of the um the phoenix. And it does raise that question about that in this guy's secret world, he might have been struggling. So this whole thing attacking the school, what it sounds like is there was something in his life. If I had to speculate, my guess would be that he used this identity, this smarty pants, I'm the best in the school identity to compensate for some other thing that made him feel horrible about himself. And when he ran the risk of that being taken from him, probably because of his age or something like that, he snapped. Because you have to remember, if you're abused or you have some terrible thing happen to you when you're an adolescent, and then you hurl yourself into work, and that becomes your identity. What you forget is that one day when that job's over, that stuff that you put into permafreeze is waiting for you. You're going to have to go back and think about it finally because you hid it from yourself by throwing yourself into work. Josh, we were talking about that with you with parenting, remember, on the lab. And then you got upset that your son's turning 21. We talked about how because now the focus got to go back to where it was before you were a parent, right?
yeah.
So I think that's what happens to some people. And my guess is this guy was getting the retirement age, couldn't get a job, and the crisis was something like, "Oh my God, now I'm going to have to actually sit still, not have this compensating identity, and think about what I was thinking about before. I wrapped myself up in this identity."
Well, yeah,
And with
because
a
I
crisis,
was constantly thinking about my children, and that was my main focus. Now it's you stare yourself in the mirror, and it's like, okay, where do I go from here? On a side note, though, I think I figured it out for scale, just for people.
yeah, tell me.
I would wear a size 18 women's dress.
Oh my God. I don't want to know what size I would wear, frankly, but but that's fine.
You'd probably be
18?
more like the 15, 16, maybe.
Not bad, not bad. So you'd be an 18. I'm just joking.
I'm
So
on,
you'd be
I'm
an
on the
18.
far
You'd be
I'm on the
what?
far
What
end.
would you be considered? What does that
I
place
would
you
be
in? Is that
considered. I'd be considered chubby.
you'd be like a Zoftic, Rubenesque lady?
I would
Chris, this
scare.
is
I would
hilarious.
scare
This is what he's
everybody.
thinking about.
Hey, if Josh is into it, whatever.
I'm not into it. I
Whatever floats your boat.
trying to figure out.
No judgment over here,
Okay, well, great. I'm glad I brought it up.
However, here are some
Josh,
text
do you
messages.
visit your forget it. All right. So
Here are
so
some
what is
text
this?
messages between him and a firearm instructor on October 18, 23. And he says, hey, I want to basically take your class. And the guy's like, well, I'm booked out next week, and then I'm out of town for a couple of days. So he was consciously thinking about learning how to fire that weapon too. Oh, that's interesting.
I wonder if he got them for the crime, or if he was somebody that already
No, he
was
bought it.
interested in
I
firearms.
have the paperwork for that
For
too.
this,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's in the
for
report. Mm-hmm.
and he was able to go over state lines with no issue with
No,
it.
he
So I
ordered
mean,
it.
which is
He
one of the
went
problems we have.
he went to a shop right there in Vegas and bought it.
Oh, so he
Yeah,
didn't
and
get it in his home state and carry it over. He bought it there.
Right, in Vegas.
yeah, and like
Well,
a
he was
lot of
living
these
in
guys,
Vegas.
they sort of I was reading about him earlier, was that he would slowly kind of pick up ammo. You know how it's like how James Holmes did. You get the firearm, then you wait a little bit. You're trying not to raise any red flags, like ordering mass ammo and stuff like that. And that's what he was doing.
So, you talked about triggers
My letter from
earlier,
James
and
Holmes.
Bonnie asked, this reminds me of the issue the BK was not chosen for IT trainer at Moscow PD, also then got fired at his job at WSMU. Are they triggers? Yeah, that's a great comment, Bonnie. Yes, they are. They could be, for sure. For sure.
Well, I think what the person is cleverly picking up on is that if Kohlberger is guilty, he'll be just like any other mass murderer where there's a precipitant that has something to do with losing your identity, your sense of control, whatever. Because just like I'm saying about this guy, the idea would be that if you're avoiding your demons by hurling yourself into a job, right? And then you think you're going to lose that job, or you're avoiding your demons by hyper focusing on a person you're obsessed with and you think you're going to lose that person or something like that, then you're going to basically go out in a blaze because you can't face those demons. So let me see, Chris, would you mind telling us what to do with a self? Oh, yes. I think that's a great question.
Yeah, turn them off. Meaning put them on stun, put them on silent. Put them on silent.
Well, Chris, I have to tell you that when we did the database, one of the things that I kept saying, and unfortunately, it's harder to do than you think, is that I have wanted for a long time to work with survivors of mass shootings and with institutions like this to create a series of protocols so that there is a uniform way that institutions deal with an active shooter situation. The problem is they don't exist, that each place has its own protocols if they have any. And I think what's eventually going to have to happen is some kind of funding, congressional funding or something, to get experts like myself and the other people together to say, if there's an active shooter, here's what you do, right? This is what should be present on every student's cell phone. So they press this button and people are alerted to their location. Maybe have the button on their ID, an ID card around their neck so they can push it, as some places have done, to my knowledge, right?
Yeah, there's
How do you lock the place down?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. How do you lock the place down? Where are the security guards that are armed? Where are their guns that are in locked boxes that can be accessed in an emergency situation? In other words, we need that. How do you prevent people like Polito from strolling on the campus like he did, which is outrageous? Outrageous. Most institutions don't do anything until after they've had an incident because there's a little bit of like institutional denial that it's going to happen to you. And then when it does, you go, dear Lord, we've got to do this. Unfortunately, the mass shootings are increasing. I heard recently, for the very first time, of a person who was involved in more than one because they left one school. I think it was a student at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, where Nicholas Cruz, we just had the anniversary on Valentine's Day. Nicholas Cruz shot the school up. She left the school and moved to Michigan and then was in a shooting there. 2 mass shootings she survived because the frequency is increasing. It's actually becoming possible to be in more than one. It used to be that rare that it would never happen, that the same person would be in more than one, and now it has. And I think, Chris, you'd agree that law enforcement and Congress and experts, psychological experts, need to get together and come up with protocols. And then there'll be some accountability
Well, I
if the
think,
institutions don't fix it.
well, I don't know if the institutions can fix it. The institutions used to fix it, and then Ronald Reagan closed all the mental health facilities in the country.
I remember that story. Yeah. Mhm.
I was on the
I
street
remember that.
in 1989 when they all shut down. And because what we used to do is you could take somebody who was having, maybe a manic depressive psychosis episode, or, who's bipolar, or who's ever, they didn't take their lithium that day. And you could actually pick them up off the street. And I can't tell you, how many times I had people on the bridge when I was a hostage negotiator, and they were having a struggle. It's not their fault. A lot of them wasn't their fault. And now today, the jails or your mental institutions or your mental health facilities. And the jails can't sustain it. And so they let them in one door and out the next. Look at the guy. Look what just happened in England. I don't know if you saw that, where a guy was out front and he burnt a copy of their religious book. And
Oh,
the
yes,
guy
I saw.
and the guy came at him with a butcher knife. Okay.
Yeah, I saw. Outrageous.
They arrested the guy who burnt the book and put him in prison or in jail, and let the guy out who swung the butcher knife. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
It's kind of like Jesus and Barabbas.
Well, even, and that's the other thing that we forget, right? So to go back to your question, or to your thought process, Gary, is this country, our society, and we've had this conversation hundreds of times, all of us, even offline as friends. And yes, we may or may not disagree or agree with each other all the time. No, I come at it from a different perspective. Do I think weapons of war should be on the streets? The answer is no. I do not think weapons of war should be on the street, i.e., fully automatic weapons should not be on the street. Okay.
You mean like bump stock kind of situations
Well,
and things like that?
if it's a machine gun, get it off the street. Doesn't belong on the street. Okay.
Like Uzi or something like that. Right.
Well, yeah, if it's fully automatic, get it off the street. Semi-automatic means if you have to pull the trigger individually. Okay, it's no different than a shotgun or a pistol. It's just the magazine capacity. Okay, but here's the point, right? Here's the messaging. Just my personal opinion, where we miss it as a society. I've never put an M16 in prison. Ever. I've never taken an automatic weapon a semi-automatic weapon, read it Miranda rights, and put it in a jail cell. I've never done it. And so we have to figure out then, okay, well, what does that mean? I mean, common sense tells us it's not the it's not the car, it's the driver. And until we as a society decide what that driver looks like, then, we're just going to keep going around this circle, because Ronald Reagan and it was Clinton, I think, that put semi-automatic weapons back on the street. Reagan released the mental facilities, and Bill Clinton put automatic weapons back on the street. So that's both sides of the pendulum in a political argument. And so it's like blowing out a light bulb.
But I guess, like, for example, in this institution, don't you think, for example, that it's odd that Polito was able to stroll right on the campus and he was armed?
Well, of course it's odd, but that's Polito's problem. It's nobody else's problem. He chose to get in his car, drive over to the campus with a gun on his person, and almost killed my son.
No, that's outrageous. And thank God. Thank God he's okay, Chris.
But to your point, of course it's odd, but that's his oddity. It's not the schools. It's not societies. None of that. It's not the gun that he had. It's his choice that he walked onto that campus and shot people. That's his problem. God says, the greatest gift I give unto you is life. Second unto that is the ability to choose. What are you going to do with it? That's what he asked us. And some people, as you have a full-time job, 24/7, 365, your phone is always ringing, okay? Because
you're lucky it's muted right now. It would be blowing up online about where I'm.
You know what I mean? I mean, how many times have I gone to calls and people have the aluminum hat on and they hear the smoke detector and think the aliens are talking to them?
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
I get exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's a core issue. The issue is Polito. He's the problem. And he was there to cause major damage, and he didn't even, I mean, he had I think he had a 9mm was what he had. And but I just read the other day in Australia that it was like 4 teens or something like that were stabbed. One died, and just, I mean, it's the they'll take what they can, they'll get what they can, and then they'll do as much damage with whatever they can, with what they have. I mean, we see it all the time.
Go look at the statistics of knife stabbings in Europe. Gary, you keep them.
I know.
They're
track.
Just as bad as guns.
When people are intent on doing something, they're going to do it.
That's the point.
Right.
So, okay, let's say, like our dear friend just put up there, guns should be confiscated, period. Okay. I partially agree with you. Guns should be taken away from mental illness. People who have mental illness or domestic violence, men who have said, I'm going to kill you, blah, blah. You know what? The cops need to step in. The courts need to step in and say, time out. Okay. Let's have do you have any guns in the house? Okay. And by the way, you can do that. The law allows law enforcement to do that now. Those are red flag laws. Okay.
Well, then Polito shouldn't have been able to get a gun. He made direct threats in writing.
Well, yeah, but he made those threats. They've discovered those threats post homicide.
I know that's the problem. That's the kind of institutional change I'm talking about. The institution should have been able to take those letters and go to law enforcement and say, I am being directly threatened. My life is being threatened.
Do you drink coffee?
Is that a joke? Is
No,
the
I'm
Pope
asking.
Catholic?
Yeah,
Yes, yes,
yeah,
I
you drink
definitely
coffee,
do.
right? Okay.
Yes.
I'm officer friendly. I'm coming over to take that away from you because caffeine's been shown to not be healthy.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, I know
I
who
get where
you
you're
do, and
going.
that's why I love you.
We don't disagree, actually. And to be honest with you, listen. We have a constitution. People have a right to bear arms. I
Yeah,
do not believe that you can violate, an amendment to the Constitution. The issue is simply a matter of figuring out what needs to change institutionally to make sure that they don't wind up in the hands of people that have been shown to be at higher risk of taking the lives of other people, which is not different than what you're saying.
yeah, but Gary, that's
But there are bad
impossible.
guardrails.
That's
There are very bad
impossible.
guardrails. Right.
But it's
The
everybody.
solution can't be to take them off completely
How are
out
you
of the
going to
threat.
determine whether a 16-year-old kid is going to get in the car and go 100 miles an hour the second day they get their driver's license?
I understand.
You can't do it. It's impossible. You can have the best parents in the world. You can have all the crashed up cars in front of the high school. You can take the kids through the slaughter program, for driving ed and show them all the movies. And the moment that kid gets that driver's license, boom,
Yeah. And don't you
they're off
agree,
to the
Chris,
races.
to get back to my original point, is that what I'm suggesting is that we look at what worked, where people survived mass shootings, and we create a training on what people should do if they happen to be in an active shooter situation. In other words, what your son did in the heat of the moment was
Yeah,
brilliant. He
right.
saved lives. Somebody needs, that's why I was asking where he learned to do that, because not everyone has the gene. Some people are going to have to be taught, if this happens, put yourself in this kind of room. Don't make any noise. Barricade in this way. Have doors that are bulletproof, that can't be shot through. That kind of thing. And unfortunately, in schools, it's in institutions where there have been shootings, they only do things like that later. After they've had the mass shooting, you put up the bulletproof doors. And I just think even having armed people in the building in certain locations. These things are very important, but there's no requirement. There's a guideline for everything in this country practically, but there are no rules that institutions, you have to, if you work at an institution, and I have, you're going to go to like 5 trainings a year on how to be sensitive in your speech, to
Yeah,
not
and that's the
offend
problem.
people.
Can I ask you a
But you
question?
don't go to a training on this?
But in the
Right.
50s, they used to have gun clubs in high school.
Yes.
Yeah.
I understand.
What
Yeah.
happened?
Well, I get it. I
They
see where
weren't
you're
they
going.
weren't
Yeah.
they weren't shooting each other. Kids weren't coming to school. I mean, there were a couple.
Oh, there's obviously been a mentality change.
Well,
From
yeah, I mean,
culture.
what happened? It's a society change. It's a social change.
The emergence of the new evil, Dr. Gary.
It's a social change,
Well,
and it's right out
that's
of
exactly what
m-
in your book.
Karl Marx will tell us all about it. He really will. I mean, anybody can read about it. I mean, I've got 3 books on Marxism right behind me. In fact, I just finished one the other day about Marxism and religion. Just the other day. And one of the things that I think the Constitution of the United States, i.e. the Second Amendment, the whole reason that it existed was not for any of the founding fathers. I mean, they didn't care. They were worried about, tyrannical government, a government that comes in and says, no, hey, as President Reagan says, hi, we're here to help you. We're from the government. And when you look and when you think about that, you've got to step back and say, you know what? Maybe there's something to that. Okay? There's something to that. And look at post Civil War. You had the grays and the blues reaching across the aisle and shaking each other's hands. And they would shoot each other in a straight line.
Mhm.
I mean, there was a gentlemanly, some type of gentlemanly, way of conducting warfare. It was ridiculous where the pickets, they would all march out and, everybody would line up and, blast one another. And then we get into the 40s, post World War II, the 50s, and kids were driving to school with a rifle rack, taking, the school had, hey, we have gun clubs, join the gun club, come shoot targets, blah, 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 blah. And even the kid in Butler, they had a gun club.
Thomas Crooks, the one who shot Trump.
Yeah. Remember, he got kicked out of it because he was a terrible shot. And they said, you're out of here. Okay. You're just, you don't fit the mold of a good shot. I'm telling you, I've had this conversation with my sweet sister, who is, she has just gone nuts sometimes on me. She's like, why do you say this? And I said, well, what do you want me to say? Take all the guns away so that everybody can start hitting each other with hammers, and then with knives, and then, with cars driving over each other. I mean, it's a tool. And can tools be utilized, wrong? Yes. But again, I think it's real simple. Yeah, archery. They'll be shooting each other with bow and arrows. Okay. Here's my last thought process. We can lock up all of the rifles in the world. We can gather them and we can put them over in a pile. Do we really believe that's going to end a society that says, I don't like the word you're using? Do we really believe we're going to end violence when you can't even go on X without having somebody blow up and explode? And it's kind of like, really? No.
Well, and on the other side of that argument, and Lord knows I agree with you, the other side of the argument is that, typically, a semi-automatic weapon is more fatal or deadly than an actual knife. Now, let's just be honest here. Guns are not going anywhere. It's almost a useless debate now. Okay, they're here, and that's not gonna stop. And like what Dr. Gary said, how do we combat it now? And there's not a ton of ways, but I will tell you that I've been very interested in this for quite some time. Is this door stopper system that they have been implementing everywhere? I think every school should have it. I think that it's I think that it is, the best form of protection that you can really have. And it's sad, but it doesn't matter if somebody comes in there with a gun or a knife, they're gonna have trouble getting into that door. And that is the kind of stuff that we should be looking at now, because
I mean, look, to Chris's point,
barricade yourself,
Go ahead.
No,
to Chris's point, if I remember the statistics correctly, about 48,000 people a year die from gun violence. 480,000 people a year die from cigarettes.
Right.
About 140,000 people a year, I think their deaths are directly related to alcohol consumption. So you have way more deaths from legal cigarettes and alcohol. Should you ban them? It's an interesting question. And I think alcohol and cigarettes get right into Chris's point about that it's about freedom and what people do with their choices. What I'm talking about, I mean, to get to the spirit of my question, is not so much about guns and access to them. It's about regulating the trainings of the people at institutions that could be targeted so that there isn't a reckless response, so that they know what to do. Sort of like in the 50s when they would do like H-bomb drills, and teach the kids on what to do if an H-bomb, can't remember, Chris, when they used to stick your head between your legs and, we have a bomb shelter and everybody goes to the bomb shelter. I mean, it was before my time, but I know about it. the duck and cover, kind of thing.
We would
And I
hide
guess
under
what
our
I'm getting
dress
at is,
just
you, you
before
know,
you
you,
get,
you understand.
yeah,
Yeah,
disintegrated.
right.
Go ahead.
Exactly. And what I'm getting at is that if you're going to have people out there who have the freedom to get these things and are unfortunately going to keep doing them, you could bet your life that sometime in the next few weeks you're going to hear about another mass shooting incident, because the statistics predict it. So the question becomes, should people in institutions be armed with information on how to deal with them? I mean, if you went into a school and you said to the kids, what would you do if one of your classmates pulled a firearm out, whatever? The answers would be very different. And you need them to be aware of what they should do. I mean, Chris, as somebody in law enforcement, it's like if you were training people for military action, there are things that are better than others in terms of surviving. Where to hide, what to say if you're confronted, should you be carrying something yourself, these kinds of things. And
Let
that's
me
an
give you,
important question.
the
Yeah.
numbers don't lie, right? The numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
So here is a simple math class. All right. Top 16 countries with the highest percentage of knife related homicides. Guess what's number one? Cuba. They don't have guns. 76% of all murders in Cuba are knives. That's just one country. Every one of these countries don't have guns. They've banned guns. And guess what's not on here? The United States. This list, the numbers do not lie. And, whenever I saw this, our friend here, I want to put this comment up here. It's a great comment by Greg. Funny how Chris is all about institutional and society change until it comes to taking away access to one gun. Now, Greg, you missed my point earlier, my brother. Okay. I said if you have a mental illness or domestic violence problem, I am for taking away that weapon from that perpetrator. However, I am not for law enforcement, sheriff's departments, or anybody else going into people's houses in this country and saying, we're from the government, we're here to take your guns. Because that's in the Constitution. That's why you put your hand up. And this is, it just will not solve itself. We've been having this debate, for years and years and years, and it's not getting resolved because the founding father said no, it's not going to get resolved. Look at the most recent Supreme Court decisions. The Supreme Court's coming back and saying, "Hey, you guys can't do this." Yeah, which mental illness? That's a great question. I don't know. I mean,
Psychosis is rarely associated with violence, actually. It's more personality disorder and drugs.
Yeah, I've stood in the doorways of people's houses, literally. I had an incident one time. I ring the doorbell. This guy opens the door and he's got remember the Ginsu knife?
Oh yeah.
It slices, it chops, it cuts, right? He had a Ginsu. And as I'm standing at the doorway, he took the knife and he put it right at his chest. It was a guy. And he says, if you step in here, I'm going to drive this thing right through my chest. I've also had incidences where you show up and they're holding themselves hostage. Okay? And you end up talking to these people. Those are the kind of people I'm talking about. Those are the people you say, you know what? We won tonight, but there's a problem here. We got a problem. Okay. So I hope we figure this out. I don't think we're going to figure it out in my lifetime anyway.
I mean, it's such a hotly debated thing, and nothing. Honestly, it doesn't change, and that's why I was saying, this night lock stuff that they have going on now. If people implement this, I mean, it could be a game changer for the safety of mass shootings, and that's really the hope, because like when your son barricaded people inside, he was protecting people by doing that. A lot of people, even door stoppers, they talk about the door stoppers. If you have one in the classroom, put it under the door, just make it more difficult for anybody to get in. And then they have the little shade things now, because each classroom, classrooms have the window that you could look in through, and it's bullet resistant. And I get it. It's a sad state that we have to even do that kind of stuff. But I mean, you have to. I don't have a choice.
Right. And so, to Greg's point earlier, that how did we get here? We can't even, society's not even capable of having a civil political discussion. And this guy, Polito, as we're talking about, it's all about him. It's me, 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 me.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, is that any different than doing this on a daily basis? Hey, did I tell you about me? Hey, let me, 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 me. Click, 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 click. Okay. No wonder we can't talk to each other. Do we really want to anymore as a society? And no wonder these outcasts, these one-offs, these nut jobs, excuse me for saying that in front of you, Gary, because, you deal
with the mentally ill, right?
Yeah, with the mental ill, right. And there's a difference between, chemical imbalance and somebody who's just
you're working with them right now
in your book. That's who I'm talking about. These guys.
Personality. That's morality. Right. That's another. I think that's more what you mean. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think, we have to figure out what that means for our society. I mean, we have a generation of children, of kids, and I'm talking to little ones now. Okay. Where we're telling them things that you and I never didn't even hear till we were 18, 17, 16, 17, 18. Now we're telling them things, kindergartners, really the kid that poops his pants in between recess, and we're bringing books into these schools of craziness and all this other stuff. What is normal anymore? I can tell you as a vice detective from 84 to 86, standing in the local bathroom down by the beach, waiting for somebody to hook up with me, that was abnormal behavior. Guess what? Society doesn't say that anymore. What have we done? And we're going to pitch it to our children too? Good grief.
Well, Polito had a doctorate in philosophy and would have been very well aware of the thinking of Kierkegaard, philosopher Kierkegaard. There's no way he would have had a doctorate in philosophy and not be aware of Kierkegaard's ideas. And one of the things that I agree with Kierkegaard about is that if in a industrialized Western kind of society, you remove the religious or philosophical underpinnings of that society, the need for that kind of thing in your life is so strong that you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to go out and find a strong man or a kind of dictator figure to venerate because you need that figure in your life, or you'll make yourself into God. The idea is that the Kierkegaardian perspective is that the removal of those things from society sets you up to fall one way or the other. Either you fall because you give your rights over, or you fall because you basically turn something into God, yourself, drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever. And so what you get are people who literally say, I'm on social media and I have 1 million followers. And you say, followers? That's something that you would say if you were a deity.
Yeah,
Followers?
or
They're
influence.
following you? Right, an influencer, right. So then you say, well, why is the world interested to know things like I ate a piece of cake today? I had a bowel movement at 5 a.m. Let me tell 1 million people. And the interesting thing is that the need for somebody to emulate and put on a pedestal and make into a kind of a pope or a god figure is so powerful. It's so powerful that we will give that power even to people that are dangerous or give it to ourselves. And that's why another principle that comes up in philosophy that's very important to this conversation is something that Sartre said, which is that he said, people are not afraid to fall off cliffs. They're afraid of the freedom to throw themselves off. In other words, if you give people too much freedom, they're petrified. They're afraid. They don't want that much freedom. They'd rather give it over to something that gives them a black and white way to live. And so the idea is the society has become terribly unglued because the so-called progress that we made towards industrialization and enlightenment caused us to set aside ancient, sorely needed philosophical and spiritual ideas that, whether you believe they're true or not, they're a kind of glue, and the society cannot function without them. There is a very powerful need in the average individual to do that. That's why, for example, if a person, let's say, is an alcoholic and they come to treatment, one of the first things you want them to do is to replace the alcohol with some form of spirituality or sense of purpose, because that takes away making yourself into the God or the alcohol. In fact, AA teaches you that, right? To go around, apologize to people, acknowledge your faults, have a higher, that's why AA, it bothers me that people talk about taking the spiritual element out to make it more universally appealing. If you take the spiritual element out of AA, it isn't going to work. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
So that I think, Chris, you know what I'm getting at, right? The idea that this, for a lot of these people, they have become their own gods.
Well, just
And
look what
as a
happens
consequence,
look what happens with let's just use social media as just a simple example, right? This is a very powerful platform. I mean, Karen and I know that, you know that, Josh knows it.
a lot of power.
I mean,
Yes.
there's 217,000 subscribers on this channel. That's a lot of personalities. And guess what? They may agree, they may disagree. That's okay. That is okay. But then there's these one-offs that go into the classroom. I'll call it the classroom, the chats, for an example. Not mine, but everybody's. Okay. And what do they like to do? Well, first of all, they're nameless avatars. They're people that are probably suffering a lot more than anybody else in society.
Mm.
These are the folks that ring your doorbell and say, "I feel better about myself, Gary, because I was able to attack 10 people tonight."
It's awful, but that exists. That's a thing. Yes.
Yeah. And okay, so what happened? What can we do with those people? Guess what? You can't fix them. They're broken. They're broken. And it's the same principle where how did they get broken? Was it their childhood? Was it their foundation? Was it a lot of things, right? Were they victims? And is this a transfer of that pain and pushing it into society? And that's where, you get this idea that says, well, golly, even this Tony Polito guy, this PhD, who feels like he's above everything, can just walk
Right.
into a university and start shooting people. I mean, what's the
Right.
common denominator around your 119 years worth of study? What's the common denominator there?
The common denominator is people who lack a sense of identity, of purpose, that then find something that becomes the world to them and lose it. Their identity, their significant other, their political beliefs, their job, their school, their best friend, their family. And when they lose that thing, they feel lost. And some of them think other people don't deserve it if they don't have it. So they go out in a blaze. But the common denominator seems to have something to do. That's why they're different than serial killers. Serial killers motivated by a fantasy that they're perfecting over and over again. A mass murderer is more of an emotional creature that has no coping skills and has a weak structure of identity and essentially collapses under the weight of a life event. And the more bitter and nasty and sadistic the personality is, the bigger the attack and the more horrible and more schemed up it is. So it seems to have something to do with that. And such people are highly susceptible to changes in society because the more society takes from them or makes them feel outcasted, the more emboldened they are. And then you've got the factor that you gain fame from it, which adds to it because you'll get a Wikipedia page. I mean, there's a woman in my neighborhood who has dedicated her entire life. She's almost 100 years old. She's dedicated every drop of her life to service of other people. She has saved people from everything from drugs to alcohol to poverty. She's had homeless people living in her house. But no one knows her name. But if she took a gun and went into a supermarket and shot 20 people, she'd get a Wikipedia page. That's the problem. And I mean, I think you'd agree, Chris, there's this misplaced idealization. And that woman is she's like a model of Christian virtue, but she's invisible.
I want to hear what Josh says. Josh, what do you think?
Right.
You've been
But
quiet.
do you know
about
what
it.
I mean? Right. Yeah. So Josh, what do you think about that?
Well,
Yeah.
I was just thinking that there's the I'm kind of where, before the internet got really big. I remember, the 90s and the late 90s, early 2000s. And then, you know, you're talking about just access to things that people didn't have access to 50, 60 years ago. And
Pornography.
well, that's that. And not only was pornography different 50, 60 years ago than it is today, it's not lost on me that violent sexual crimes have been on the rise as pornography has progressed into fantasy. And then you have these
They're correlated. Yeah.
yeah, like if you watch an old Western and somebody gets shot off their horse, you see the shot, they get hit and they fall off the horse, right? It's very anticlimactic, but you get the picture. If you watch a movie today and somebody gets shot, their head explodes. I mean, and they make it, so realistic. It almost becomes, a desensit, you become desensitized to that kind of stuff. And I think that has a huge part, that kids are watching, they're watching fights. I mean, if you go on X, I mean, you can see anything that you want. They don't, X does not care. It's been like that, since it was Twitter. There's very few things that they block out anymore. And children have access to that, developing minds. And then sometimes they become emboldened. I mean, Eric and Dylan, they were obsessed with the movie Natural Born Killers. Very violent movie, very graphic. They said that they said that it kind of empowered them. And then now you have kids that study mass shootings, that are obsessed with them. You saw it the other day, with I don't remember the state that it was in, but it was on Valentine's Day because of Nicholas Cruz and the Parkland the Parkland shooting. It was supposed to be 2.0, and you just find out that a lot of these kids and young adults are kind of left to their own devices, and it's disturbing. I was just talking to my grandma about this the other day. When I was a kid, we were outside. We were playing baseball. We were playing, kickball or whatever it was. We were riding bikes. The human interaction. There was no iPad. There was no, I mean, we had video games, but it wasn't, it was like Nintendo 64, Mario Kart and things like that, or 007. And now you have things like Grand Theft Auto that kids play. And it has attributed to a lot of things. It's just, I think that the progression of the internet, social media, all these things can be fantastic, but they can also be detrimental to a lot of people.
So
Well,
we
you're
did a
describing new evil. That's new evil. That's what the whole book's about. Yeah.
But I think the new evil is going to be outdated in 5 years. Less than that. No, what I mean by that, that's what I'm saying. Seriously. And guess what it's going to be? It's going to be virtual reality.
Well, that's kind of already started.
And we did a program about that. Gary, myself, I don't remember who else was on it.
Greg, Dean. Yeah.
Dean, Greg. Okay. And you guys can, folks can, you're hearing it here as well. Okay. We haven't seen anything yet. I mean, think about the type of crimes that we don't even talk about that we know exist. The type of crimes that are just so horrific. Imagine if you had a virtual world, that you have this fantasy and you can now play it out in this virtual world, and then take your goggles off and go to Starbucks. Just think if Ted Bundy had access to that world. Just think if Ed Kemper had access. We just go down the list. And just think if now we're taking children at 5, 6 years old, and we're saying to them, hey, don't worry about this piece of literature with naked people on the cover and people with chaps and all this other stuff. We're all unique. We're all here together. And then we plug those children into the same world where all of these other individuals are. We have no comprehension of what's coming if we don't get it together as a society. And that means both sides, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. There is a problem, and it is a very large earthquake, tornado, hurricane combined. It's coming. And that's just not to the United States, it's coming to the world. If we do not figure out as a country that children are off limits, because every single individual that I've ever put in prison, I just interviewed a guy last week for multiple essay problems. I went to the jail. I sat right across from him. And he gave me stuff that was back from 1978 forward. And I asked this guy, what was this fuel? And he told me. And then what did it go from? It went from the bookstores behind the counter to the, the place in the back to the internet. And I wanted to ask him, what will VR do for you? And you, Gary, you and I both know where I'm going here.
Yeah, of course.
And so this is the next wave. And what we're doing is we're desensitizing kids on behalf of offenders. Not everybody's an offender. Let's just make that clear. But probably 8 out of 10 are. Let's be honest. Let's be clear about that too. And they're just waiting. They're patient. They're patient. I can show you videos of undercover operations picking these people up in hotel rooms where they're discussing kidnapping children for movies and murder. And I'm here to tell you.
And everything in between.
And everything in between. And we're talking very seriously about, stuff that's coming. It's coming. Isn't it interesting that even though it was a part of a facade for Bundy, the last conversation he had, what did he tell Dobbs? Who did he blame? He didn't blame himself.
Pornography.
He blamed
pornography.
Yeah. Right? Gary, you have written a book about it in terms of this book. That every murder that I ever worked, there are 2 common denominators: alcohol and P. Pornography. Every single murder that I've ever worked, one of those 2 common denominators is going to be involved. And because my expertise was children, the second one was the 100% mark. It hits it every single time. You want to see craziness? Just go talk to an ER nurse or an ER doc. Gary, you've worked the ER.
Indeed.
And you will be surprised. Mind blow of what presents itself in the ER room. And then the idea is like, you really? Yeah.
Well, I read a report one time that said that it was something like 48% of all emergency phone calls were alcohol or drug related.
Well, yeah. Well, the drugs are a one-off. I'm talking about individuals that want to harm our children or our wives or our daughters or our granddaughters.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a combination of things, no question about it. All these things, like you said, like a soup. It's kind of like a melting pot of just things that aren't really healthy. How many times have you ever watched I'll watch a movie or something, and if it's like a spiritual type thing where it's like a haunting or something like that, I'm just like, I don't really enjoy those kind of movies because they kind of frighten me, like, because I sort of believe in that stuff, that I do believe that those kinds of things can happen. And, I just have to kind of stay away from it because I don't enjoy that, and, but if you kind of immerse yourself in these sort of situations, then it's typically maybe it's not healthy, all the time or at all, obviously. Ted Bundy, he did blame pornography, but, and I'm sure that had something to do with it, but it's not the end all be all. He had free will, free choice, wasn't a stupid guy by any means, but he had no self-control over what he wanted to do. It trumped everything. His desire for, what he wanted was the end all be all, basically.
Well, I think this is a good time to wrap. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, I was going to say that I think the idea is that if somebody were to say to me, in the simplest terms possible, what's wrong with society right now, I would say that it's going through a disease of meaning. It's lost it's like Jung used to say that madness was the loss of the capacity to make meaning anymore. When you're going through something, the way you get around it is to make an existential meaning out of it, whether it's philosophical, spiritual, whatever. It allows you to make sense of it. For example, Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, a wonderful book. I'm sure you know it intimately. Tells the story that he was contemplating the death of his wife in Auschwitz, Birkenau, where he also was interred. And he said to himself, by being the one who survived her, I am sparing her the pain that she would feel if she had to think about losing me. And it made it more bearable, that he gave it a meaning. Well, I think that's what's going on is that if you don't have a sense of meaning, you're going to fill it with something. And for most,
There he goes again.
You know,
Everybody in this
right,
room have a
right.
motive for killing Mr. Taylor. And the name of that killer is
The
we
knowledge
got
bomb.
booted for a second. No, it's okay. I don't know if you heard me say that for
No,
some
we didn't.
people, the last thing left before the pull off before you hit madness is creating a world of fantasy in which you have total control. And you see this in some people. I see people who come and talk to me about how in their private relationships they have no sense of control, but in the world of pornography, for example, they have total control. They can dictate who the object is of the sexual fascination. If somebody is not interesting anymore, they stop watching them. They go to another page. They look at a different video. In that world, they're a god. And the idea is, I think, that what's happening on a large scale societal level is exactly the same. And what's also happening is, I think, that people feel entitled to do whatever they need to do to fulfill that fantasy because they feel so disenfranchised and that things are so, unfair or whatever, that they feel, look, this is my fantasy, got to be me, got to be free. And so what you wind up with is this terrible, terrible confluence of philosophical, spiritual, and psychological factors that has made it mixed with technology that have created this era that Michael and I call the period of new evil. And I think Chris is right. As the technology increases and so on, what you're going to see is newer and newer evil. Michael and I predicted that one day we're going to need a category 23.
Well, that's what. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what Chris was saying earlier.
That's exactly what he was saying earlier. So I think it's interesting that we took this Polito shooting and we put it into this larger framework, which is what is society doing to produce Politos?
Yeah,
What
PhDs,
the heck caused that?
professors,
Right.
right? I mean, just because somebody has a PhD doesn't mean they're exempt from becoming a mass shooter.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true.
And
Chris, can
And
I ask you before we're done here? Can I ask you how your son is doing?
he's fine.
yeah, it's a good
He's a
question.
McDonald. Yeah, no, we've talked about it. We've had deep talks about it.
Yeah.
And, Karen and I let our children breathe. Right. But then we also let them know that we're here. We're not going anywhere. And, this fear is the opposite of faith. You have to have faith, but you have to embrace that fear. One of the craziest events, I think, in my time in law enforcement, and this is what kind of, changed me a little bit. I've had some pretty crazy stuff happen. But, you know, I've seen a lot and witnessed a lot. And I remember going to a scene where and I've shared this, but I'm not going to go into it too much, but an entire family was wiped out. And I mean, it was like 1, 2, 3, 4 family members were just disintegrated in a very bad automobile accident. 3 children and a mother. They were hit from a guy who was going like I think 110 miles an hour. And here's the crazy thing: the husband and the father was ahead of the mother who got hit. And I thought to myself, holy cow. You know, when we all got on scene, there was nothing left. I mean, nothing. There wasn't a human being in that vehicle. They were all embedded into the engine compartment, literally disintegrated. And then I've had cases where I put a kid in 42 separate bags one night. He got hit by an Amtrak train. And those are the kind of things that live with me. And so when I see 2 people fighting over, you know, stupid stuff, just stupid stuff, I ask myself, what's going on here? What's happening with us? Is social media dividing us to the point where we can't even have a conversation like this without somebody insulting us or you know, throwing a here, there, or whatever, you know, it is? You know, you don't understand. Okay, great. Maybe we don't. Maybe we are, you know. But I don't know a lot of people that can tell you that they put a 20-year-old kid in 42 bags. I mean, and they won't understand where I come from. But guess what? We're both human beings and we can understand each other if we want to. I choose to want to understand other people. That's why this channel exists. I choose to understand an opposite opinion. That's why I put them up. The trolls, when I put their statements up, I put it right in front of the world to see, to say, okay, let's talk about it or let's disagree. That's okay. And actually, it's healthy. But when go ahead, Josh.
You know, it goes from that to, you know, when we have, you know, the 3 of us, we don't agree on everything ever almost. And but you're not an idiot because of the way you think, and I'm not an idiot because of the way that I think. I don't feel that way. I think that having these discussions are, you're correct, they're healthy, but it goes from, I can't believe that you feel that way about something, you're an idiot. It's like, okay, well, then that's just somebody I don't want to have a conversation with, you know. And that's why I like talking.
I don't think that we. Yeah. Go ahead, Josh. What'd you say?
I just said that's why I enjoy like having these kinds of conversations with people that are respectful like you guys, and listen to everybody's, you know, thoughts. You don't have to agree with it. Doesn't matter.
I don't actually think that we disagree that much. I've seen people disagree a lot more than the 3 of us do, but I think that what we have going on is that we understand that we don't know everything. I think the common denominator in people that are reasonable is that they're open to the possibility that somebody knows better than they do.
Sure.
And I think that's really what I mean, because I mean, it's the essence of intellect is the realization that you could read every book you can get your hands on until the day you die, and you won't know one little tiny itsy bitsy drop of the knowledge that exists in the world, because the world is too big and this is only one planet of knowledge. I mean, you know, we're talking about an entire universe out there. And you could dedicate your entire life to knowing everything there is to know about dust and get a PhD in it, and you still wouldn't know the tiniest drop about anything. So, I just think that you have to have that humility to know that you don't really know very much, even when you know a lot.
Sure.
And then there's some people that don't know anything at all, and then there are people who know very little, but they know the matters of the heart.
That's a great point, Claire. We've forgotten how to play. That's exactly right. That we've forgotten that what we learned as kids. We've forgotten how to have fun with each other. That Karen met when Karen and I were dating, and she told me one time, she goes, "You're like talking to one of my girlfriends." I was like, "What? Huh? What does that mean?"
It's a compliment.
Well, but I was so dumb, I didn't even understand it, in terms of internally, but I came to understand it, of course.
I could just see Karen saying that to you too.
Yeah, I married so far up, I can't see
You're
straight.
like a girl, Chris.
Well, I can talk like a girl. Karen will tell you she calls me Chatty Catty for a reason. Okay. And that's one of the reasons I was good in the interview room in Homicide. I would talk to these guys for hours. I mean, literally 6 hours, no problem. You want to talk about, what do you want to talk about? This is why it was a natural transition to the microphone here. I could go on for days, but the audience won't stay up with me. But okay,
well, before you go, Chris, I do have a question. One more question.
Go, hit me.
Is bowling a sport?
Yes, I was a very good bowler too, by the way. But John Gallardi and my friend, okay, my dear friend, he just passed recently. We missed a silver medal in the police Olympics by 2 pins. The California Police Olympics, John and I, we were like, well, we're crappy at everything else. How about bowling? He goes, sure. So we teamed up, and it was a team, and we got 2 pins off of a doggone silver medal. We never got it.
Well, that's something that we're going to have to disagree about.
Yeah, bowling's a sport.
No, it's not.
We had a debate about what's considered a sport, and we came to the conclusion that I believe
Gary
that
thought riding a bike.
Gary
thought just riding a bike alone is a sport. I mean,
it is. It's called racing.
No. Riding a bike in the park by yourself.
That's closer to exercise or a hobby. Yeah, but I think what we concluded was that a sport requires that there's competition with someone else, and that something's at stake, some kind of title, money, whatever.
Look, you're an expert
but the
on
thing is that
sports are not one of them.
We missed
me?
the bronze.
I know nothing about.
I got
sports.
bupkis.
I know nothing about.
I know, but
who knows bupkis?
I got bupkis. Bowling.
I know nothing about sports at all, none. But I do know that the definition, now that we've obsessed over it, I looked into it, and it does seem that most people would say that if you're doing something on your own, it's not a sport. It's closer to a hobby or exercise. The sport requires that the other person, there's somebody you're competing against.
I just don't
think being in a bike race is a sport.
I don't think you can chug a beer while playing a sport. And that's what you can do in bowling. And that's what people do.
Bowling. You ever heard of PBA? Professional Bowlers Association?
I have, yeah. They're very good.
They used to have it on ABC Wide World of Sports.
Used to watch it.
Okay.
I like bowling.
You've answered your own question.
Well, I don't think it's a sport. I think it's an association.
That's what about snowboarding?
No.
I don't know. Probably not.
How about skateboarding? Tell that to Tony Hawk.
I would, yeah, probably. I mean, it seems
what about
like
surfing.
I don't know.
What about billiards? A billiards a sport?
Now the only thing I would agree is lawn darts. You don't want to get one of those puppies
They're like
caught in the top of your head.
Those are illegal.
I got it.
I had this debate with Gary on the lab the other day, and you'd be surprised at how many people take bowling extremely serious. And I'm not saying that
people got angry at you. Yeah, we had one person get angry at Josh because their son was in the Olympics for archery.
Just my opinion. Yeah, this lady was like, my son was in the Olympics for archery. Is that not a sport? And I was like, I think archery is a sport.
Archery's a sport.
Yeah, but I don't think bowling's a sport.
What do you think daycare had an effect on our society, Gary?
To be completely honest with you, I don't feel qualified to answer that question. I've never heard much about that. The only thing I ever heard about that topic is that there are some studies that suggest that children who are in daycare wind up in adulthood with lower degrees of social competence, that they have different ideas about how to relate to other people than people who are raised in a home, closer to the home, instead of being in daycare. But I think that's a controversial and kind of limited finding. But I've never heard really much else. I've certainly read a lot of literature on things like the absence of a father in the home or the absence of a mother can have an enormous psychological effect. I don't have to tell you, Josh, as a person who had an absent parent, right, because of murder.
Yeah,
but it has an enormous psychological effect. Yeah, and it's interesting in Anne Burgess's work. They found that one of the really strong predictors in men who committed serious sexual homicide was the absence of the father. Which was very interesting. It wasn't the mother; it was the absence of the father, had an enormous effect. And and that gets into another aspect, which we're not going to open that can of worms, but it opens a whole other aspect of this period of New Evil. Is there are very, very, very major changes to the fiber of the family structure that have had probably an enormous effect psychologically on people. Don't you think that's true, Chris?
Yeah.
Just even on its face?
100%.
There's something to that. So I would suspect that the daycare world, has had an effect because it implies parents that are very busy and not present in those ways. But you have to be careful with criticizing it because there are some people they have to make ends meet and they've got to do what they've got to do. And they're doing that because they love their children and you need both parents working.
So I have a question thinking of that.
Yeah.
And then we'll wrap it up. We'll go to Hawaii. What did the father say when he dropped his child off at daycare? When the buffalo dropped his son off at daycare. It was a buffalo father.
What did the buffalo say?
When he dropped
Don't
his
take
son
any
off,
wooden nickel. No, let me think about this.
when he dropped his son off at daycare.
This is some kind of pun, in other words.
He said, bye, son. I thought he was going to say bowling is not a sport. Bye, son.
Bye, son.
Bye, son. All right, everybody. We love you guys. See you on the next one.
Bye, son.
Thank you, too, for being here.
Hard working every day. I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts. Wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't we're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.